Folks a thank you. I wanted to give folks on the call a heads up. So we will run Q&A. The chat box is turned off. Q&A is turned on. You can feel free to ask questions as you think of them, and I will pop back on to pose those questions towards the end of the session. I won't be saying names, but if you have any information in those questions that potentially could identify you, it is possible somebody could realize that you attended this webinar. I like to just mention that, and you can do with that information what you will. So with that, I will pass it off to Farah, who's going to lead us today. And I will go off camera and I'll see you back here in about 40 minutes.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Maggie, and welcome everyone. We're really excited to have this session today with our amazing panelists on the topic of assessing and mitigating the evolving risk to children online. So I'll just start off with a quick introduction of myself. My name is Farah Lalani. I'm currently the Global VP of Trust and Safety Policy at Teleperformance, which is a company that offers content moderation and other trust and safety solutions to social media, gaming, dating, and a number of other digital platforms. And I'll also introduce my wonderful panelists. So today we have Bob Cunningham, the CEO of the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. As a highly experienced not-for-profit leader, Bob believes we must be able to do better than this for children. He's been president and CEO at International Center for Missing and Exploited Children since 2018. And over the last 2 decades, ICMEC, which I'll abbreviate, has worked in more than 120 countries, empowering the global community with the tools, training, and technology to create a safer world for children. Thanks so much for joining us, Bob. And we also have Dr. Rebecca Portnoff, Director of Data Science at Thorn. Dr. Portnoff has dedicated her career to building technology and driving initiatives to defend children from sexual abuse. She is currently head of data science at Thorn, where she owns strategy and vision for machine learning across the organization. She works cross-functionally with business and technical functions to develop, deploy, and maintain ML and AI and algorithms to accelerate victim identification, stop re-victimization, and prevent abuse from occurring. She leads Thorn's engagement with ML AI as a field, including emerging threats and emerging technologies. Welcome, Dr. Rebecca Portnoff. And last but definitely not least, we have Jun Young Ro, the VP of Global Affairs for NAVER Z's Peto. Jun is NAVER Z's VP of Global Affairs and previously worked as the investigations lead at Google and was also the Director of Trust and Safety previously at TikTok, Financial Crime Investigations Manager at BNP Paribas and JP Morgan. He received his Master's of Advanced Study in Criminology, Law, and Society from the University of California, Irvine, and BA in Criminology and Criminal Justice from the University of Maryland. Jun is also serving as a board member for Safe from Online Sex Abuse and Selective Service System of the US. So welcome, Jun. So pleased to have you all with us today on this important topic, especially now because of all that we've seen in the new regulation emerging. So obviously we've all seen the long-awaited Online Safety Act receive royal assent in the UK. And then just recently, the EU Parliament, Council, and Commissioner have reached a compromise on the AI Act. So there's a lot going on in both regulation and also the threats that we're seeing to children online. Given that 1 in 3 internet users worldwide are children, and 1 in 5 children have experienced cyberbullying, and we've also seen a significant increase in child sexual abuse material, including self-generated CSAM and the emergence of AI-generated CSAM. I think this is a great opportunity to hear insights from our amazing panelists on this topic. So without further ado, let's get into that. And my first question will be directed to you, Rebecca. What are maybe you can give us a bit of a background here on what are some of the threats you're seeing emerging, particularly from generative AI, because we've seen a lot of discussion in this area recently, and given your focus on this at Thorn, maybe you can help us understand a little bit better the details around these threats.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump in and unpack some of that. So, Farah, what we are seeing is that generative AI is today being misused to scale sexual harms against children. So you've already referenced their misuse to make AI-generated child sexual abuse material. So we are seeing bad actors taking advantage of mostly broadly shared and open source models to create this kind of content via text-to-image prompts. We are also seeing bad actors misuse this kind of technology in a way that creates new victims and furthers re-victimization, specifically fine-tuning some of these base models with, and I apologize, this graphic, with existing child sexual abuse material, existing series of these children, so that the model is now capable of generating the same depictions of these kids, but in new poses and new, more egregious content, sometimes like sexual violence. So this, unfortunately, isn't just limited to images either. This kind of misuse also spreads to text when we are seeing the misuse of large language models to generate grooming text and sexual extortion text and graphic descriptions of child sexual abuse. So the good news coming out from all of that is that we've been tracking the prevalence of AI-generated CSAM in particular in communities that are dedicated to child sexual abuse. Since last August, we published some of these findings in a report earlier this year with the Stanford Internet Observatory. But what we are seeing is that the prevalence of this content, it's small, but it's growing. It's been consistently growing since we started tracking this content. So to me, that means that while the impact is real and present and happening now, we absolutely still have a window of opportunity to intervene.
Great, thanks so much, Rebecca. And building off that, Jun, because you're leading with the work at Zepeto in terms of the trust and safety aspects there, maybe you can speak to what are some of the evolving risks you're seeing for children in immersive environments, whether Gen AI or others, and kind of how you're seeing that play out.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I think that's a great question, and especially I think the Gen AI does really pose a lot of significant threat to online safety, especially our children in the online. And definitely a delta between the traditional social media Gen AI is the metaverse, the immersive world, right? And specifically, what we are seeing is now Gen AI combining with the immersive metaverse virtual world together and making a bigger impact to our users. What I mean by the impact is a little bit more the negative sense. Just to highlight some of the views that we see, something that I would love to share with the group here is when you look at the traditional online grooming or the traditional predatory behavior, it's a very 2D based, text based, right? Usually through the comment, through the text, the DM, the two will engage. But what we are seeing is it becomes more of a visual and the 3D basis because you could use the avatar. It's almost like a human-like interaction. So what that means is before the people will use text and then the emoji to interact with each other. Now what we're seeing is they're using the avatar's expression through the face, body, or they use a gesture to basically express and engage with the other users. And more importantly, because of the with the Gen AI, a completely different spectrum of what we're seeing, it will enable avatar to become more human-like, and it will help us. It will basically, from a business perspective, it will make a avatar a little bit more human-like. What it does is that the speed of the interaction, for example, when you look at the traditional grooming speed, at least on Zepeto, through the DM or the text spaces, the interval between the two become a little bit more closer to each other. It took some time, but now with this immersive experience, it becomes shortened. So with the shorter the time, the two become a significant, and then that will become that can pose a threat to become, for example, sex torsion or the grooming behavior or predator behavior, right? So that is definitely what we see because people feel more relatable to the avatar, right? They see them as another human rather than just the text that you see. And that kind of goes to basically users have a more open mindset to the meeting people in the immersive interaction, the interactive environment, and which diminishes or lowers the suspicion of towards a stranger. When you look at the traditional social media, you will look at the profile and say, hey, that may be the fake profile, or there's nothing on the profile, something may be bad, right? But in the sense of the metaverse immersive world, it's a strictly avatar basis, so it almost looks like you, right, or the other person, and it's almost same. So that suspicion kind of goes down. Therefore, what we are seeing is avatar based immersive world tends to create a more point for bad actors to meet with the younger users, and therefore it poses a little bit more child the activity. And the second part is very short. What we are seeing is what the immersive world creates is the world, right? Before the social media, the traffic is between the influencer and then the other users. But what the immersive world does is that it creates a space where people, there's a little heart that goes in, sorry. It just makes a transaction between the users come into the world, and through this world, what we haven't seen, but what we're trying to prepare for now is all these the world before it took the users to design and create and really to put a blocks to create a world, right? But now with the Gen AI, people are basically using the Gen AI to create a world, and in a bad sense, and they could come in and they could kind of go through the process. They could hide it through the images, they could hide it through the text, or they could hide through the effect or the package too. Eventually, when it gets released to the world, people will see that abusive behavior on the platform. And there's just it becomes a little bit more complicated when it comes to immersive from the sense. And then once again, what we don't see yet is we don't see a crazy byproduct of the abuse that is because of the metaverse. Because for me, a virtual world or metaverse has not yet matured yet, right? However, what makes us a little bit more scared in a sense is now before the metaverse world become mature with the Gen AI introduced, it makes easier for this metaverse to become matured, right? And it can kind of come in together. So that is what we are trying to prepare, and we are trying to make sure that we have a policy and guidelines to decide the rule on what is allowed and what is not allowed, and then what really Gen AI activity can be happening in Japan or not. I think we are trying to really stand from there, and that we are also really monitoring how some of the regulation, some of the companies like Thorn, like Dr. Rebecca said, we could kind of leverage the help, then bring in those expertise, and then try to really embed it into the better process.
Awesome, thanks so much. And I think, so we kind of got a lay of the land in terms of some of the Gen AI risks, particularly for CSAM generation, and then some of the threats in the immersive environments. And overall thinking about assessing risks for children online, I wonder if there's also some positives we should be highlighting or speaking about in terms of either improved AI classifiers that we can now use, or using Gen AI for content moderation to really better understand the risk to children online and protect them. So maybe Bob, if you want to speak to that, and then also Rebecca, would love your perspective there as well.
Slow on the mute button, sorry. So at ICMEC, we work with law enforcement and corporations and other NGOs all around the world. And I think we're starting to see some approaches that will allow generative AI to really step up the protection of children in addition to these threats to children. And what we're hearing from folks who are looking at this right now is the same characteristics of generative AI that are allowing bad actors to abuse the technology to harm children are hopefully going to allow good actors to use the technology to protect children. So when you think about generative AI, what is it? It's AI before generative AI would take large amounts of data and recognize patterns in it and that sort of stuff. Generative AI takes that a step further into actually creating things because of it. So you no longer need that human engagement to create things because of what is seen in the data. And so I think that if you think about what people who are harming children right now are doing, they're taking ideas that have been around for a long time, right, in terms of these technologies, Photoshop, virtual and augmented reality, animation, all of those kinds of technologies that have existed, and they're improving vastly on them by using generative AI, right? So what we are looking to see now is how can generative AI be used with tools that already exist? So like you said, the content moderation, how can we use generative AI to be able to faster, better, more accurate kind of content moderation, or providing information in terms of recommendations and things like that to people? More importantly, how can organizations like our friends in law enforcement use the tools that are already at their disposal and enhance those tools using generative AI, so that it's not only attacking back at applications of generative AI, but also other applications that are used to harm children. So that's what we're really seeing, is the really smart people like Dr. Rebecca at Thorn, our friends at the RCMP, our friends in Australia. They are all now looking at how to use generative AI to augment tools that already exist as a start, also thinking of what could be created. But I think our hope, ICMEC's hope right now, is that some of that work on what exists will be amplified and augmented so that it can combat this in a much faster way. We can't wait, right? It's not at the point where it's a massive, massive problem yet. As Rebecca said, it is growing. We can't wait until it's grown to attack it. I think that's the point.
Thanks for
Great
the
point.
kind words, Bob. Oh, sorry, Farah, I didn't mean to cut you off
Yeah,
there.
I was just going to turn it to you, so go right ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks for the kind words, Bob. I think that the only level of detail that I would layer onto that is, when it comes to generative AI technologies, those advances are really built off of the backbone of new deep learning architectures, like new model architectures, so things like transformers and diffusion models, and that these deep learning architectures absolutely can be used in other more traditional detection and prevention settings. And so to me, from a practitioner's perspective, that's sort of the first thing that I would do, is in the same way that with any kind of new advancement in machine learning and AI, we would want to see whether or not we can update our current tech stack to reflect those new advances. That's kind of the first step. And then to Bob's point, there are also more future-looking ways in which we could potentially take advantage of some of the maybe image summarization aspects of generative AI technology that's to specifically help with investigations.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca. And so transitioning from that kind of focus on the threats and technology and also the new potential opportunities, maybe we can talk a little bit about the regulation that we're seeing across the globe. And I want to come to you, Jun, and ask about, with the Online Safety Act and of course the Digital Services Act, which is passed, what are some of the new requirements you're seeing on platforms to protect children, and how are you particularly looking at assessing risk in line with the new regulations?
Oops. Yeah, thank you. First, we are not part of, Geppetto is not a very large online platform, so thank God. We don't have to meet, those are not some of the requirements that we have to do. One is how we're doing first, is we are currently working with the in-house counsel and the external counsel there are in the EU and the UK to basically form some of these the action item, and they're trying to implement it in the Geppetto. Some has been implemented already, some still in the work in the progress. And I'm gonna kind of build up my conversation up or talk around this one is where we are basically trying to do what is listed on the regulation right now, right? Can we go above and beyond? I want to build a little bit more around those. And when you look at the DSA and then online let me exclude the UK online safety bill, but when you look at the DSA right now, it's about the transparency and it's about how fast you can handle some of these complaints or some of the user report that comes in, and basically making sure that what you are doing is transparent towards the users, right? So I am not a DSA expert. I'm not an online safety bill expert. So rather than that, something that I would love to talk about, and I really want everyone to kind of take away is I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and some of those conversations around the DSA and then online safety bill, and something that we don't talk about is something that which I want to talk about it is. When you look at the DSA, it mimicked the financial crime, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing regulation in the EU, which is very similar to, for example, the BSA, Bank Secrecy Act in the US. And when you look at how these banks are operating under those regulations basically they have to have this program structure and the processes of how they can combat the money laundering sanctions. And then they will have every year they have to go through the internal audit. Sounds very similar to what the VLAB has to do. They have to go to the internal audit, and then after the internal audit, if the firm is large, then the more services product that you service, and then there may be a failure, so you have to mitigate them. Smaller, you don't have the resources, so which means it will take you some time to mitigate some of the issues. And then the next step is that you have external audit, which is audited by the government, right? So what I'm trying to say is what this regulation does is that it makes the platform, or it makes the company very reactive to the regulation, right? So where they are is when they need to invest some of this time to fight this emerging and new abuses that comes in, the focus will kind of goes into, hey, we need to mitigate the legal risk, not the user risk or brand risk, right? So that's where the resources kind of pours in. And all of us here in trust and safety professionals, we have been there where with the downside of the economy after the pandemic, the layoffs and the techs, after the HR, we were also trust and safety field had the large impact, right? Which means a lot of times we're just the cost center to the company. And when the company needs to scrutinize their budget, we are the kind of one place that people will look at and then say, hey, we want to lower the cost, right? Then the platform will have to choose either they have to abandon them or they have to basically just mitigate the legal risk. And that is a part that I am a little bit more concerned about the DSA and the UK online safety bill, which is same as the UK online safety bill age assurance. For me, I'm not against the regulation. I am for the regulation person. And I think the regulation do provide internal controls and the safety net to the platforms and the community. So I am definitely, but what I think we need to do as a professional, not as employees, as a humans and citizens, we need to constantly engage with the legislator and then the work with the community to make sure that these laws will have a gap, right? These laws will have a problem, and we need to address them so that this regulation is a constant ongoing thing rather than the one-time regulation that is there and done, right? Because what we don't want to see is all these big techs and the small companies are doing all they can, all they're doing is really mitigating the legal risk. And that is the biggest concern that I have about the DSA. But once again, I am very aligned as much as aligned with the DSA to the transparency. I think the users will need to know what is really going on and how when we receive the complaints from the user report and how we have to act on it and what are some of the processes and some of the controls that we have to make sure that users are protected.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jun. And Bob, I think you can probably share some insights here as well, given that ICMEC has done, a global review of legislation. So when it comes to legislation across the globe, how are we seeing countries working to create and enforce laws that protect children? And maybe you can speak to some of the trends or highlights that would be important for all of us to know.
I think I'll start by speaking to some of the confusion, because that's the kind of overwhelming experience that people around the world are having right now, especially the folks who are charged with enforcing policy and legislation. So when it comes to police officers and criminal justice professionals and judges and folks like that we work with very closely, part of the challenge is folks aren't sure whether their existing legislation actually covers generative AI and things like that. There's a lot of confusion out there. And one of the things that we look at when we do our global review, it's actually not included in our normal global review, but the RCMP has asked us for several years to do a little bit of additional digging and follow-up. And one of the things we look at is whether countries' legislation criminalizes synthetic media. So, in other words, cartoons and anime and manga and things like that. And there are, out of 195 countries and territories that we look at, 124 of them actually do have laws that criminalize synthetic media. We at ICMEC believe that in most cases, those laws can be applied to images created with generative AI and things like that. We're not legal experts in every country or anything like that, but we're strongly encouraging the countries around the world where we work and where we have relationships to take that approach and to look at that. The challenge is, even if the laws exist, then you have to have police who understand that, and you have to have prosecutors who understand that, and you have to have judges who understand that in terms of how they treat evidence, what they accept as evidence, those sorts of things. And this is where I think trust and safety professionals can come in a little bit, is if you are seeing, these types of images and you're experiencing it, by all means report it, right? Especially if you're in those 124 countries. By all means, report it to the police like you do any other criminal activity. And that will start kind of encouraging, just that will help to encourage folks to look at this, think it through. Other countries are, in fact, addressing it head on. We've seen a couple countries now starting to get legislation written and start to be pushed through to actually criminalize the use of generative AI in this way, or the result of generative AI. So I think that's really encouraging. But for us, again, like with the technology, where we kind of are encouraging people to just start where they are and use the technology to improve what already exists, I think it's the same thing in the legislative contest. Start where we are. We have 124 countries where there's a good shot that this stuff is already illegal. Run with that for now and try to lean toward assuming that it is covered under those sections of the law instead of assuming that it's not. And of course, each country has its own process. Each country has its own courts and interpretation. These cases will wind their way through. That's good. That's how the system and that's how the process is supposed to work. And if it turns out that the laws are weak in those areas and the cases get thrown out, then there's a much clearer mandate for people to act in terms of improving legislation, creating legislation, that sort of stuff. So we're at the very beginning of this, and we're paying attention closely to what is going on. But we are now advocating in those countries where this kind of law does exist around synthetic media to actually apply it. And that's the first thing we think needs to be done.
Oh, that's super helpful. And I think, one of the concerns that I've heard quite a bit recently is with AI generated CSAM, with reporting happening because it is realistic and people are trust and safety professionals are obviously trying to do their job and report. Where they're seeing that, one of the challenges will be the capacity for, organizations like NAVER Z or even law enforcement capacity to then prioritize rescue of real children. Would love to have, your perspective on this.
Yeah, we're concerned about the same thing. The volume could be overwhelming. I think right now it is not, but that's the main concern that we hear from our law enforcement partners around the world, is they are concerned that the volume here is in fact going to be overwhelming. We're a capacity building organization, right? ICMEC trains police, works on advocacy, trains prosecutors and judges. that sort of stuff, to the tune of 150,000 of them since ICMEC was founded. So we have a lot of experience in this area. We are hearing these concerns. That is not a capacity issue, right? And that's going to require the kind of technology solutions that Rebecca was talking about and that we've discussed a little bit. You're never going to be able to build the kind of capacity, human capacity, in a police force that it's going to take to address this kind of problem. But there's also an axiom that we hear a lot that I think is relevant, which is we're not going to arrest our way out of these problems, right? So this is going to require prevention and awareness, education, and it's going to come down to families and children and teachers and doctors and folks like that who are going to help with prevention and awareness to make sure that this doesn't become overwhelming to the systems that exist. There's either a technology solution or there's a prevention and awareness solution. There's not a capacity solution to this in the traditional sense of the thinking.
I think that's a really insightful point and a great segue to Rebecca, because I know when we're talking about, you know, mitigating and how we deal with this, you know, obviously regulation is one tool, and the reporting and enforcement is one tool, but what are the opportunities to build on Bob's focus on prevention to actually ensure safety by design and sort of building some of these preventative measures into Gen AI or other technologies to create safer online experiences for children from the get-go?
Yeah, absolutely, Farah. I think prevention is obviously a critical lodestone here, and especially in this particular moment in time with this emerging technology. And so when I articulate sort of what safety by design could mean in this particular space, I want us to think about the entire life cycle of machine learning AI, where you have folks who are developing the models, you have folks who are deploying the models, and then you have folks who are maintaining the models. That develop, deploy, and maintain are all, and some of these folks are all the same people sometimes, but develop, deploy, and maintain are both, all three of them are core to how machine learning AI gets built and distributed. And each of them represent, or each of them contain opportunities to prioritize child safety. So I can talk off a person's ear on this topic, so I won't do that today, but I'll just share a couple of ideas on what some of those opportunities could look like. So in the first case, you know, models are all about their training data, and following best practices on ensuring that you are sourcing your data in an ethical way, in a robust way, in a way that doesn't source from data sets that are known to contain CSAM or other abusive material. Like, this is a really simple first step. Similar simple first step that can be done is to detect, review, and remove, and then report any CSAM that you do find in your training data sets. I know that this can be kind of a strange concept sometimes for folks to think of, but the fact of the matter is that these models are built off of just bazillions of pieces of images collected from the internet. And as I think everyone in this community knows, those pictures contain CSAM. That's something that exists on the internet today. Red teaming is obviously a concept that comes up a lot in these types of conversations, pressure testing models for their capabilities to produce this type of material. I would say in the same way that machine learning AI is an iterative process, we need red teaming to be iterative too, where you're not just once and done and then think this is a complete task, but that you're continuously stress testing. I want to talk a little bit about content provenance here. So content provenance is this concept of being able to track back the original how of how the data was created. You know, Bob was talking about sort of this law enforcement concern of having the already overtaxed system be overtaxed further with even more content coming in. To me, content provenance is critical here. Being able to have robust solutions that indicate how it is that this data was generated, and being able to detect that not as a optional post-processing step, where for example, a bad actor could just kind of remove the portion of the tech stack that includes that provenential information, but have it baked into the image generation process itself, so that this is something that happens as the image is generated, even if that image is getting generated on someone's private laptop or private desktop somewhere. So that's some of the ideas there. I know that I'm going past the 2 minutes that I was supposed to give per question, so I'll pause, but I just want to reinforce there are a lot of opportunities to mitigate the misuse of these models by downstream bad actors that we can action on today.
That's super, super insightful, Rebecca. I think you know, prevention and safety by design and all these points you touched on around provenance is going to be key so that we can get ahead of this and really before seeing the growth, try and mitigate some of these risks. So I think those are really great points to consider. I wanted to also check because I think the prevention awareness topic is so important. Jun or Bob, if you had anything else to add there, maybe in terms of Jun, what you guys are seeing in terms of trying to build in safety by design, or the, you know, have the policies and processes and sort of procedures to try and prevent the harms before they occur.
June, do you want to talk? Do you want to mention the?
Yeah, sure. You know, I'm gonna be very honest. It's a very hard fight because you have to basically fight with the product team to make sure that, you know, they don't, when they are a little bit more less cognizant about some of the risks that we see, right? So really the common sense building with them is amazing. But as you mentioned, that is basically something that we are trying to do is for our company, whenever we do look at the products and features, what we look at is the policy is the very first, right? The tendency is people would jump in and think about what are the controls that we want to put it in, right? Because we're thinking about the enforcement perspective first rather than the policy. But I think the kind of step back and think about the policy as to, okay, what is allowed and what is not allowed, and, you know, what are some of the variables and some of the deviations that we may see, and how do we make sure we have a control of the policy of them is the important process that we do. So, for example, when the Gen AI really hit the market, and when we haven't seen the Gen AI coming to our platform, what we did was we created a little small task force to decide, okay, how do we want to approach Gen AI, right? When we are building Gen AI, how do we want to approach it? When Gen AI is introduced to our platform, how we're going to be approaching. Those are some of the task force policy that we are doing. And at the end of the day, the other one is straightforward, and it's hard fight is sometimes we just have to just say no to it. What that means is that in Japan, image sharing, video sharing is not allowed. My logic was, okay, we are a immersive world or the metaverse. Why do we need a image and video sharing? That is a fight that I had done with my CEO and the product, and we won, right? And at the end of the day, what we don't want to do is, okay, you know, of course, this is not applicable for all the platform. At the end of the day, as a trust and safety professional, what are some of the business needs that you have it? And then what are some of the risks that you see out there? How do we put them together and introduce it, and then make sure at the end of the sometimes choose the most restrictive, most conservative approach to just mitigate the risk at all, right? So it doesn't mean it ends. The abuse is not gone. A form of the abuse is still with us. For example, the grooming will still happen, but what they do is they will move to another platform, right, where the image and video sharing is allowed, right? But in between, we are trying to introduce some of these prevention and some of these the ways to make sure the users are the frictions to make sure that those abuses are lessened and is somewhat protected.
And from my
Yeah,
sorry,
please
from
go ahead,
my
Bob.
perspective, I think when it comes to the, you know, policies, prevention, safety by design, right? Safety by design is such a powerful framework. It's a powerful way of thinking. And one of the questions that I had, you know, for my own teams at ICMEC and for others that we work with is, you know, how closely does existing policy and how closely does existing regulation and legislation line up with the thinking involved in safety by design? ICMEC has not looked at that, right? That's not something that we've looked at over the years, but it's something that we're going to look at, because I think that, you know, of course, anytime you talk about policies or regulations, you have to have shared vocabulary. You have to have an understanding of concepts that are included, excluded. You have to have shared language, definitions, that sort of thing. So bringing people together to get that all in place to the extent that it's not already. But then how do you include this in legislation going forward? How does it line up now? How do we put it into what's yet to come? And that's one of the conflicts I see between policy folks and companies, in the world is, companies are, as June said earlier, compliant oriented, right? They're compliance oriented. They want to make sure they're complying with what is needed. And it's hard to get folks to go beyond compliance. There are some great companies that do, but the first step in a company's mind is always compliance. It should be, right? So that's there. So to the extent that those powerful concepts in safety by design can be included in policy and regulation, I think we will get better prevention built into all of the things that are to come around generative AI, augmented reality, virtual reality, those kind of spaces. So I'm very interested in that. And if you are interested in that, let me know, let ICMEC know, talk to us, because this safety by design has to be something that we all get behind as an industry, whether you're at a trust and safety official or an NGO or a company. We all need to get behind that, and we need to figure out how it can inform and enhance our current policy and regulatory efforts for prevention.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bob. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. So in terms of a lot of the discussion we've had, we've talked about, some of the investments that need to be made and some of the changes that are required. And I think with all of this, we see that there are some trade-offs, right, when it comes to whether it's safety by design or whether it's policy changes or like Jun, you mentioned the stopping the sharing of images or videos. There's always kind of pushes and pulls when it comes to this work. So maybe each of the panelists can kind of end off with giving their perspective on taking a step back. How can we more effectively reduce the risk for children online, of which we've talked about that there are many, while also nurturing their expression and ability to freely interact online? Because we have seen a lot of legislation, and there's different perspectives on this, on restricting social media use, or different policies that are kind of limiting children's expression. So how do we find that right balance? And I would really be interested to have each panelist share their perspective on this. Maybe we can start with you, Rebecca, and then Jun and Bob.
Sure, happy to share my thoughts. So I think, sort of trying to build off of some of Bob's last comments, actually, I would say this is less of a how and more of a what. I think that what we need to see is a cultural shift in hiring practices. So right now, think about it. When a tech company spins up and they're scrappy and they're trying to get things going, who's their first hire after, who's the founder's first hire? It's an engineer, right? It's an engineer who can actually build something. That's their first hire. So I would like to see us have a culture shift where the engineer is, yes, the first hire, and then hire number two is a trust and safety professional. Somebody who has seen where these things can go wrong, where they can go right, who understands the nuances of what needs to be balanced and can work as a team, so that, to Bob's point, we're actually actioning on safety by design. Because I talk about safety by design in the case of generative AI, but this technology is out there, right? So to some extent, it's safety after design a little bit. And I would like to see us shift to a place where it's truly safety by design.
Yeah, for me, rather than the reducing the risk, I would love to talk about the nurturing the expression, and then what are some of the things that we can do. This definitely will not be regulated, part of the regulation or anything, but something that we see as a promising data. As a smaller company, we had this is kind of building up to what Bob said, and then Dr. Rebecca, we just had a lot of restriction as to what we can do with the engineers, right? So we do have a traditional detection models and then enforcement, but at the end of the day, it was not, we didn't have we didn't have too much resources or money to enhance them constantly, right? And to build more controls around it. So what we decided to do was we start to talk to the users, and what we TLDR of it is what we found out was a awareness of the safety of our young users. For example, when we ask, do you feel safe? What does safe mean to you, right? A people's awareness of safety was much less than we thought, right? And it was varied by the different regions of the region. For example, users in the Southeast Asia had a much less, when they think about the safety, they're talking about the sexual harassment, bullying. That's it. Well, they don't think about the scam, the integrity, some of the misinformation, disinformation. They don't be cognizant about it. So what we decided to do was two frame of it was education education and then incentivizing the safety. What we did was, hey, if you read our community guideline, we're going to incentivize you, right? If you take this quiz, we are going to give you the items, right? So what we want to do is we wanted to make sure that our safety becomes more immersive and it's more fun to the users. Like how you're on an airplane, before right before you go on, before your flight is up in the air, you see this very traditional boring safety the announcement, right? Now there's most of the airline is pretty immersive, right? For example, Korean Air, they use the K-pop stars, make sure that it's fun to watch, right? So that's what we want to do was, hey, safety isn't just a feature, safety is not a boring subject, but we wanted to make interactive, it's fun. And then also you could make a money. And what I mean by the money is that we will give you the coin and we'll incentivize you for doing this one. And what we saw the promising data as the users interactive, their awareness. For example, when users with the little bit more of the education and more of the awareness, there, for example, the user report tend to have a higher positive rate, right? When they report, it becomes a positive rather than the false positive. And also, it just becomes so powerful. So echo to the Bob, I think at the end of the day, the platform will need to think about, hey, within our community, how are we going to raise the awareness of these groups, right? And then bigger, from their bigger perspective is how are we going to involve the parents and then community members to make sure they are also watching us and watching the children, and that we make these internet safety. So for us, the raising the awareness and making sure providing this education has been the top priority and will be the priority for us.
Yeah, June, there's no way for me to top that. It's culture and education. And that's the responsibility of every company and every NGO and every lawmaker and every family. And that's what this comes down to, right? So if we are developing environments on our platforms where there's that culture of safety, culture of awareness, culture of caring about kids and for kids, then you're going to still have bad actors, but the impact is going to be less and less and less. And the ability of the people who are there to have fun and the ability of the people who are there to do what is meant to be done on these platforms is going to be enhanced. And the experience of young people on the platforms where young people are appropriately on platforms is going to be enhanced. So I think it's that. And then it comes back to, we often leave schools and folks like that out of these equations. They can't be. Right? Like this has to be part of what our schools are addressing. It has to be part of what our systems of education are addressing. And that's the only way that you're truly going to have safer kind of environments. June is a more creative guy than me. Like I think the incentives and the gamification and the K-pop stars and all of that, by all means, everyone who's creative and can come up with a creative solution of how to catch people's eye, how to catch their awareness and engagement, do that. Like, please do that, because it has to be cultural and it has to be education.
Awesome. These are all such insightful points and a great way to end this portion of the panel before moving to questions. So I want to thank you all for your insights and pass it to Maggie, who's going to highlight some questions from people on the session.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. We definitely have way too many questions than we'll be able to handle. So that's always a good sign of a good engaged audience. And I'll start with the first one. So apologies if I don't get to your question. I'll try to get to as many as possible. First question. So we got a question around whether we need more terms in this space to differentiate between CSAM that's generated by AI and CSAM that is produced through abuse of human children. And I'm curious, this is probably most relevant to Rebecca from a research perspective, and then Bob from your perspective as well. I'm curious, do we need more terms? Do we feel like we have the appropriate terms to describe kind of this new form of abuse or new form of CSAM? Would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So I think I would start by saying that crisply distinguishing between CSAM and AIGCSAM, which is the acronym that I tend to use, I agree. I think that it is good to have clarity on what's what and being able to communicate effectively with each other. I do want to unpack a little bit this concept that's in the question here about direct harms for a real victim. So let's think about that just a little bit at a next level. So we talked about how these kinds of technologies are being used to create additional AIGC-SAM of known victims, but they're now put in new poses and new postures and new, other kinds of explicit content. So to me, that's a real victim. That's their face and their body, and it's being put into a depiction of content that they didn't do. But I think if you ask them if it harmed them, I expect that the answer would be yes, in the same way that CSAM is harmful. I think the second point that I want to make is we've talked about training data as being really critical to these models. The fact of the matter is that AIGC-SAM could not be created with generative AI if the training data sets did not contain photorealistic images of real children. And I would ask you, did those children consent to the use of their faces and their bodies to then be made to create AIGC-SAM? Did their parents consent? Do we as society consent to the use of our children's images, their faces, and their bodies to create this kind of content? That, to me, has to be a part of the conversation when we're talking about harm.
Thank you. Bob, go ahead.
No, I thought you might be waiting for me. I'm not going to say it any better. Question asked and answered.
Awesome. All right. We have a second question. Jun, this might be a good question for you. Do you find that the immersive world possesses similar or more risks in grooming than traditional social gaming?
I don't want to say more, but different, right? And then when it says the more poses, not from a user perspective, from a platform perspective. Earlier I mentioned about a lot of grooming now has been moved from a text from the behavior perspective, right? So for example, me and for example, Farah is talking to right now each other, and it kind of poses some grooming behavior, right? If it gets reported by someone else's, right? And when we try to reconstruct those data of some of these engagement, now. For example, if you think about the data perspective, we need to capture this from a 3D perspective. It's a lot of data that we have to store in order for us to reconstruct and look at what really entails. So from a text to the gesture, the 3D basis, it costs us much more. Therefore, a room for the amount of time that we could store becomes lesser. That is definitely there. So once again, I don't think it's any different. It does. What we see is that timing wise is much shorter. But it's a very different, the spectrum of I don't say spectrum, is a very different behavior that we see on the immersive compared to social gaming.
Thank you. Question for Bob and Rebecca. Criminal justice system has used PA tools like Compass in the past, but they have been known of replicating some of the algorithmic bias. How will you ensure Gen AI doesn't replicate those biases and effectively does harm mitigation?
Bob, you mind if I jump in here?
No, go ahead.
I really love this question. I think that it highlights the real role that responsible development plays in this space. So I said, I lead a team of practitioners. Like, we build this kind of technology to help defend children from sexual abuse. But I know, because I'm in this space, that models get stale and models have bias. That's a fact of life. So what that looks like is incorporating into your workflows really rigorous user feedback and monitoring of performance. Don't just be satisfied with kind of holistic measurements of how your performance is doing precision recall against the target class, but get specific on particular demographics. Like for the CSAM classifier we build, we evaluate whether or not that classifier has commensurate recall across different demographics of different children, because we want to live into our mission that all children are getting defended by the technology that we build. So there are existing best practices and workflows around responsible development and bias mitigation in these kinds of models. There's a long, rich history of it, and it absolutely can and should be applied in these new emerging settings.
Yes, what you ended with is what I would have started with. I think these things are out there and they're known and they're well understood. And so do it, right? Like, use what is there rather than focusing on creating a whole new set of ideas, concepts, procedures, processes. Use what we've got. Let's see how far that gets us, because right now we're not using what we've got. So do that first.
Awesome. Bob, there's been a couple of questions for you around law enforcement. How is law enforcement around the world acting to this potentially illegal content? Before, animation was treated with, that's not a real child, no need to pursue. However, now we have a scenario where imagery is indistinguishable from a real child or using a real child with Gen AI. Do you see law enforcement pivoting to this being a more serious indicator and more pursuable?
Yeah, so obviously I am not a law enforcement professional, but in the work we do with police around the world, we see serious, genuine concern about this, right? So I can remember, I wasn't even at ICMEC, but I do remember how artificial images and things like that were treated at one point in time. We are not seeing that with the generative AI because it's so realistic. And I think to Rebecca's point, people know, law enforcement officials know that even if the image is not real, that doesn't mean that the kid is not. And so right now, a lot of what you're seeing in generative AI is actually involving real children, just in enhanced imagery in some way. And so even like we've worked with task forces, right? We helped to convene task forces around victim identification and things like that. And those folks are all taking this very seriously, like trying to identify who those victims are, even if the image has been altered. And so I am not concerned about that at the moment, at least not in an overwhelming way. And I think that the desire we've seen on the part of law enforcement officials to deploy the laws that exist in those 124 countries around synthetic media is really strong. So they are wanting to go out there and employ those laws to apprehend people, and so we are not seeing it being taken lightly.
Thank you. That's such a great answer. June, this next one's for you. Are you thinking about getting some kind of watermark tech or or in your avatar creation that has ability to not available an avatar for Gen AI use or not allowing for screenshots, imagery of avatars to then be manipulated?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two perspectives of it. One is the watermarking the AI or the AI notification is something that we're doing it. So for example, some of our creators are using the Gen AI to upload some of those items or some of these resources. The watermark will kind of, not the watermark, but the notification of the AI will go in to make sure the users are aware this is AI. And for the watermark of the avatar, I think that is something that we're not actively doing it yet, but we will likely need to consider if our avatar becomes more realistic and human-like. At the moment we're not, right? But that is something that definitely we want to explore, because right now our avatar is much animated like. So that is where we are. But definitely something that we're going to explore.
Awesome. And we have time for one more question, and I'm ending on a really hopeful question. I am in prevention and wondering how often those in the trust and safety world receive prevention education and training. I listened to this conversation. I'm so hopeful that if we work together, we could make even greater strides to protect children. And I think this one's probably for anyone. Actually, Farah, this is a great question for you. You probably could answer this question.
I mean, I think it's a great point. We all should, right, be getting that training, and I honestly don't think that it's standardized or consistent, or it's happening. So I think that's a huge opportunity, and maybe something we can work on with the TSP.
If only there was an industry association that could lead that kind of charge.
If only, if only. Well, we're right at time. I just want to thank everybody. I had folks copy over the rest of the questions so we can kind of summarize those and see if we can answer any other questions. Thank you to everybody who attended this session and for all of the engagement. It's always really great to have such great turnout, especially for such a critical topic. And thank you to our panelists and to Farah for organizing. This has been amazing and so valuable. So, and valuable to all the folks who will watch back. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.